can I ask you, do you ever read comic books?
Yeah.
Yeah? Do you remember the first comic book you ever read?
Yes, indeed. It was in Spanish.
Yeah?
I'm trying to remember the name of the cartoon. I think the literal translation is The Phantom.
Phantom.
Yeah, I can't remember. It's not from the Marvel, superhero series or anything like
It's an indigenous comic, or is it a reprint?
It's actually, I think it's more of an indigenous type comic from Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico?
Yeah, it was actually sold in Spanish in New York where I grew up.
Cool.
Yeah. And of course, then we go into the Marvel superheroes.
Yeah.
My favorite ones were the Batman comics.
Yeah? Madman? Mike Allred? Yeah, he's one of my favorites.
All the colors that they used and all the different, the bad guys, all the characters. It was.
Yeah, that was a great book. Laura Allred did great colors on that book. It really stood out.
I know. It's probably one of the most interesting books I ever read.
One of the things I'm doing out here is I want to put out a podcast, a comic book podcast, and I have a character I call a comic book shaman. And so I wanted to do some drums, but I was trying to look for a drummer who likes comic books, who maybe would want to go in. Are you familiar with podcasts?
I'm learning about it now.
It's like you produce your own thing, your own radio, TV show, and then put it on the web, and people download it for free. I mean, I really want to do this. I don't know how I can ever make any money off it. I don't know, but I have this idea to put a drum dimension into it and have a drummer, and I have like an idea. I have this character I created named Web Conga, who's my assistant, and so I was looking for somebody who might be interested in participating in something like that. I mean, there's really no money in it, but you can get international exposure. People can download it from all over the web, and I've seen a lot of podcasts, and it wouldn't be too hard to be the best one out there, because it's all pretty ground level, just people like.
Let's work on the concept together.
Yeah. What's your name and web?
Henry.
Henry.
Henry Brune. Yeah.
Henry Brune.
100 Million Comic Book Readers by the Comic Shaman. Every comic book is a drop in a river that flows back through time for hardly a century and into an uncertain future through a much diminished present. In their history, comic books have seen many changes, but at root, the whole idea is a financial transaction. Any quality or indeed excellence is incidental to the process of creating and publishing a comic book in the current culture. Back in the depths of the Great Depression, Max Gaines envisioned a simple product he could sell shitloads of for $0.10 a piece, and comic books were born about 1933. It was years before anyone tried to produce new material for a comic book, and years again before anything you could call good appeared. If you can call Superman good, but the Man of Steel sold action comics in numbers unseen in an industry selling a lot of product already, and publishers began to cultivate talent as they could, and titles in their hundreds and comic books in the millions entered popular culture as Dada disposable art. Collecting comic books was discouraged as detrimental to new product sales, and second-hand sales were verboten. Comic books were here today and gone tomorrow, never to be seen again, except by chance or great good fortune. Comic book racks were ubiquitous in newsstands, candy stores, cigar shops, at airports, bus, and train stations all across the country, and available for one thin dime. People of every description saw comic books all the time, and millions bought them every week to kill an hour in those pre-TV days of the war and post-war years of comic books' heyday. From the very beginning, a steady ratio of 25 stinkers to one good transcendent comic book had been published industry-wide. For a dime, people had fairly low expectations, and the publishers realized this and usually cranked out more of whatever sold last month. By 1946, the overall quality of the industry's output had raised several notches above wartime product on average, with pioneering individual creators standing out by exploring and expanding the young media's form. Siegel and Schuster, Will Eisner, Lou Fine, and Jack Kirby all broke new ground for others who joined the flow of the comic book river, producing a stream of product reaching to this very week. Many are called to create comic books, but precious few do them very well, with the result then that the bulk of comic books published are of workmanlike quality at best, and typically awful by any discriminating standards. It's perfectly possible to buy a different comic book every day for a year and never read a good one, and many did so for decades until the dynamic and economics of the industry shifted with costs and public tastes until by 1990 nearly all new comic book sales were through dedicated comic book shops, and at a cost more than 20 times higher than the original dime price. The joy of reading and collecting comic book art is in discovering that tiny fraction of transcendent comic books that consistently find their way into print. This short list is different for everyone, and everyone who reads comic books will choose some few and reject the majority. Reading comic books is only the tip of the iceberg. Beneath the surface is their object quality. That moves millions to save them and collect them. Collections are as varied and diverse as the people who accumulate them, and they bring their owners certain satisfactions that exceed their cost and bulk of storage. These people are evenly flung among the population at large, young and old, rich and poor, educated and simple, lazy and industrious. All kinds read comic books for their own reasons, but they're spread thinly around the country and points around the globe. The really amazing thing about comic books is that they've reached a new plateau, with perhaps the top 2% of all comic books published being literate, narrative, and illustrative expressions worthy of the title work of art by any objective criteria. Evil Eye, Love and Rockets, Black Hole, Louis Riel, Age of Bronze, Sin City, Palooka Village, Madman, Stray Bullets, and The Goon and Frank are all examples of comic books by talented writers and artists working without outside editorial constraints, in the manner pioneered by the underground comics of the 1960s. Each creator owns her work, a step up from the traditional work-made-for-hire deal paid by the big companies. These and many other great comic books coming out today are the best ever made, and it continues to get better as the creators stretch the comic form. Ironically, these worthy efforts are bought and read by only a pitiful few thousand readers, when they might be enjoyed by millions if they could only discover them. But doing so is always a long shot because of the present inequitable system of comic book distribution. In the salad days previous to 1980, comic books were delivered to retailers and picked up when the next month's books came out by distributors, who then billed only for issues sold. This was an imperfect system from a buyer's standpoint, but convenient and profitable for the industry when the economy was such that a dime was a considerable amount of money. Today, comic books average over $3, and retailers must buy them sight unseen on a non-returnable basis, ordering 2 months in advance, guessing which books might sell. Good comic books sell eventually, but crap sells as well, and even better off the stands when it's new. But over time, as the river flows on, crap sinks to oblivion while the good stuff appreciates and finds buyers reliably. The trouble is that tastes vary wildly, and few agree on what is good and what's bad, leaving retailers to rely on ordering from the major companies whose books most of their customers prefer to buy. Workman-like comic books that overwhelmingly greet curious potential new readers who happen into comic shops from time to time, as well as long-time customers accustomed to this fare. This is the status quo, and it's got to go. Comic books must break free from the bonds of non-returnable distribution if they're to take their rightful place as a superior entertainment choice in the mass market. The present level of comic book readership is at a historic low. At the same time, top product is at its very highest level. Point-of-sales locations are in ridiculously low numbers, leaving most towns in Texas with no retailer at all. It is perfectly possible to create an incredible increase in comic book readers nationwide within the decade on the strength of just 4% of the industry's output, measured by each person's taste, which commonly encompasses roughly that number of the torrent of products produced. As people are different, each will make her own choice, and the wide diversity of comic books holds titles to appeal to every taste. Now, it's no good attracting thousands of people into shops today because they order too close to the bone in a stagnant market. The cool, independent titles that would appeal to today's readers are absent from the stands in most shops, and if ordered at all, it's usually one for a subscriber. It's not entirely clear that the industry could grow exponentially so quickly, however attractive the sales numbers. We are where we are because comic book distribution is a tough racket. Comic books are heavy and bulky and fragile from a salability standpoint. They're dated for the most part, and 75% of all comic books are virtually unsaleable a month after they come out, except perhaps for a quarter on a dollar, if you're lucky. So retailers may be excused for trying to keep unsold titles to an absolute minimum. Consider the numbers. Say the average comic book costs $3, and say that breaks down to a $1.50 cost to the retailer, which is split between publisher and distributor. The average weekly industry output amounts to 75 titles or more, easily. Most dreadful, but some few extra wonderful. Few retailers actually read many comic books, so all they have to go on is what their customers buy, and overwhelmingly they buy Marvels and DCs, and the few independent titles that mimic the big houses. Shops that carry a lot of indie titles typically have many unsold comics each month, often a third to half of their order or more. This can easily amount to hundreds of comics per month, the majority of which may never sell for enough to recoup their costs. This is not to say that no one might want these books, only that none of the shop's customers do. Shops survive by having subscribers who order their books through previews, the distributor's monthly catalog. While this helps maximize profits by reducing unsold books, it also leaves little but crap for sale to any potential new business coming in off the street. New readers are what's needed to bring change to the industry, and lots of them coming into shops on a regular basis and catching the comic book bug. That only comes with reading large numbers of comic books they like over time. This is so unlikely with things as they are as to seem impossible. Consider the obstacles. First is competition from other media entertainment. Next is the scarcity of retailers, which are few and far between. The high cover prices can be a shock, and perhaps most difficult to overcome is the common perception that comic books are for children and/or garbage. Creating new comic book readers requires changing people's lives just so. This is one of the very most difficult things to accomplish, but it's by no means impossible. It must be done methodically, one reader at a time. For the industry to expand and become wildly profitable, it must stop worrying about selling product and start investing in creating new readers. Creators must work and learn to improve. Publishers must print better comic books. The distributor must restructure so that publishers cannot publish crap with impunity, meaning some adjustments for unsold product. Retailers must form a new business plan that includes levels of inventory higher than optimal for other similar businesses. Returns on unsold product is the essential element needed to increase readership and profitability across the industry, and here is one way it can work. Draw districts on a map of North America and grant license in each area to a contractor who undertakes the physical process of collecting and processing returns in her district. This is an expensive and capital-intensive undertaking, but it may be possible to make it profitable by adjusting the division of the comic book dollar. The 100% markup retailers enjoy is justified by the non-returnable terms of the present system, but it's unsupportable with returns. A third of that might be more profitable with more inventory and no unsold product costs. Additionally, publishers must bear the cost of making crummy comic books by being debited for returns, which will promptly sink a good many of them. Further, increased volume will justify the share of the distributor's end of the dollar for the returns contractors. For instance, an incentive to bid the license might be the right to order product at distributor cost on a non-refundable basis. For someone with 5 or 10 stores, this could be a valuable perk. But how can a contractor make money? What does she do with the comic books? What's the incentive? What would this mean to the comic book industry? A contractor will make money by increasing the number and profitability of vendors in her district, and by raking in a piece of every comic sold. At first, returns might be limited to 2 or 5 or some number of copies per issue, so vendors can ease into new titles and learn how to order enough, but not too much. The returned product would be handled variously in different districts. Some returned to publishers, some would be saleable products sold in many ways. Of the rest, some would be appropriated to donate to veterans hospitals or other organizations that can put them into people's hands. Nothing makes readers better than free comic books, and the remainder let out in bulk, lots for pennies. This is a job for an optimist workaholic with solid finances and a keen feeling for the comic book business. And this license is bound to interest a few of this sort of person, among many others. Of course, these licenses can only be granted by the distributor. Why are millions of people going to start reading comic books? Because the consistent level of transcendent comic books has reached the point of supporting promotion. When people see a cool comic book, they want to look at it, touch it, read it. It's a natural human response, so the course is plain. Go out and tell people. Show people good comic books. Explain what they are and how to get them, and move on to the next one. That's basically it. 1 million discriminating new readers buying independent comic books as a dominant preference would transform the entire industry from an archaic, declining niche market into a hip, vibrant entertainment media esteemed above television and perhaps equal to films. Of course, increased readership will attract opportunistic publishers who will just put out volumes of inferior comics, as happened in the 80s boom and bust. But with a returnable distribution system, they won't last long, and that history won't repeat itself. Really talented creators will have little trouble getting their work published, and the general quality of comic books will rise steadily, and new amazing comic books will appear regularly to the acclaim of the media and the masses, until so many are produced that they negatively impact the ecology and tax our natural resources. If the end of comic books is to come, rather it be for too much success and popularity than for boring product and reader indifference. The Comic Book Shaman, May 7th, 2003.
Listen to your woman, but not closely.